I am a business development expert and certified coach, and I'm also the founder and CEO of Caroline Sarah Ventures. I have the rewarding job of helping women find purpose and breakthroughs in their personal and professional lives. So I am really delighted to be here today. I am also honored to serve on the Irish Chamber's Women in Leadership Committee. Thank you all for joining us for the 6th installment of our Women in Leadership series. And this is actually the 4th one to be presented virtually. Thank you also to your 2020 Women in Leadership series sponsor, Jeff Daly, Lisa Daly, and Gay Parks Rainville of Daly LLP. Their team has decades of experience handling high-stakes litigation, arbitrations, and investigations. As partners and attorneys who came from some of the largest law firms in the world, they have represented public and private companies, as well as their directors, officers, partners, and employees in some of their most important matters. So today, I'll go through a few housekeeping items. Our session will be recorded and available on our website. Please be sure to keep your microphones muted. We welcome questions and interaction, and you can do that throughout the program if you submit those questions on the chat function, and those will be addressed at the end of the program. So I would like to now introduce our speaker, Miss Ryan Manion, who, along with her father, Colonel Tom Manion, accepted the Irish Chamber's 2019 Yorkerton Award on behalf of Travis Manion Foundation. Drawing on her personal experiences, Ryan inspires audiences to become the best versions of themselves through service to their communities. Using military service members and their families as models, she provides practical ways to create a culture of servant leadership in a wide range of environments. Ryan believes in taking a strength-based approach, empowering people to lean into their individual character as a means to improve personal well-being and cultivate change on a larger scale. Ryan unfortunately lost her brother to war and her mother to cancer, and she's the daughter of a retired Marine. She's a wife and mom to 3, and she's no stranger to resiliency and how to struggle well in life. Now the president of one of the nation's leading veteran service organizations, the Travis Manion Foundation, Ryan works to empower veterans and families of fallen heroes to inspire future generations to change. After Ryan's talk, our member Kate Shields will join Ryan for a fireside chat. And in addition to her conversation with Ryan, Kate will also share news from another member, the Museum of the American Revolution. Ryan, the floor is yours.
Okay. Welcome. Good afternoon to everyone. Thank you so much to the Irish American Business Chamber and Network for having me today. I was just saying I'm still getting used to this virtual environment and speaking to my face in a computer, but I'm very happy to see so many faces on the computer today. It's wonderful. And I am privileged to be able to talk to you today about my story and the book that I wrote, The Knock at the Door. And, you know, in order to tell the story of The Knock at the Door, it's as simple as me sharing my story. So I figured that I would spend a few minutes doing that before we kicked into the Q&A portion. I grew up as a military brat, as they like to call it. I was the daughter of a retired Marine Corps colonel. I was born in Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. And every 2 years until I was in high school, I moved. And it's interesting because I talk about that a lot now because when I was young, I didn't understand how unique that was. It was just part of my life. And the kids that I was around living on military bases, they dealt with the same challenges as well. and frankly, I say challenge, we didn't look at it as a challenge. It was just, where are we going next? But it did two things for me. One, it taught me to be resilient at a very young age. And it's something I look back on now as one of the bedrocks for how I became a resilient individual. And number two, it helped to forge a very strong relationship with my brother and only sibling, Travis. Travis and I were born 15 months apart. As you know, Irish twins, as we like to tell everyone. And we were incredibly close. We were a year apart in school from each other. And I always knew that no matter what, no matter where we moved, no matter how many new people I had to meet, I always had my brother Travis there with me. And so that was a very important piece of my life growing up, and something that I held on to very dearly. And as Travis and I grew up, we settled into, when my dad left active duty, we settled into the Doylestown area, where he took a job with Johnson and Johnson. And I like to say that Travis and I went on two different trajectories. I was, for the first time, in an environment where I was surrounded by people that I would be able to hang out with and cultivate relationships with for more than 2 years. So being social for me became very important. On the other hand, my brother was very driven for excellence. And I talk about this a lot in my book as something that, again, I didn't recognize as being unique when we were young. I just kind of thought, well, that's what he does, and I like to hang out. But looking back on it, it was, I mean, I think about it now as the daughter of a high school girl, and I have 3 kids, and to see the drive that my brother had at a very young age, it was unique. And so I marveled at it a little bit, watching what he did and how he identified with his goals and how he went on to achieve them. Because of the goals he set, he was an All-American wrestler at LaSalle College High School. He was all-state in lacrosse and all-Catholic in football. So he set some really extreme athletic goals, and also academically, he was one of the top students in his class. He went on to attend the United States Naval Academy, and from there went to become a United States Marine when graduating from the academy. I, again, remained completely in awe of his drive and his dedication as he moved through life. And I took a bit of a different path. I went to Widener University and didn't really know what I was going to do with my life. I majored in English, which I guess is kind of the universal, I don't know what I'm going to do degree. And but at the end of my college career, I thought, I want to be a business owner. And again, this is a 22-year-old kid who thinks, I want to own my own business. And so before graduating from college, I'd already taken out thousands more in business loans just to add on to my student loans, and decided that I wanted to start a clothing company, and not really knowing what that meant or how to do it. I did it. And I opened a store in Avalon, New Jersey, and really learned on the fly how to run a business, the things I needed to do, and a lot of things that I had no idea I would even have to think about. But call it a little bit of beginner's luck. My business was successful. And so I felt very much like I had found my path, my course, what I was going to do with my life. And it was an exciting time for me. I got married a year after I graduated from college and had my first child the following year. And things were going really well for me. I was actually about to sign the lease on my second store in Doylestown the day that my brother Travis was killed. That was April 29th, 2007. I had come up from New Jersey to sign the lease on my second store business, and came to my parents that day with my 10-month-old daughter. And I decided, when we woke up that day, it was a beautiful Sunday morning, and my mom said, you know, you're here from New Jersey. why don't we just have some people over? Travis was in Iraq, and every day my mom was focused on what he was doing, how could support him back here in Pennsylvania. And every morning when she woke up, she wrote him an email, and she was always sending care packages that probably never got to him because he was not stationed on a base. He was part of a military transition team. But I think she found in that moment, that Sunday morning, I being there with my daughter, she thought, you know what, let's do something. And so she called a bunch of our friends and family that were all local and invited them over for an impromptu barbecue at our house. I ran out shortly before everybody was coming to the house to sign the lease, right in the borough of Doylestown. And as I was standing there, literally pen and paper in hand, my phone rang. And I looked at it, I saw it was my mom, and I ignored the call thinking, all right, I'm almost done. I'll be home soon. Immediately again, the phone rang, and I looked at the phone, and it was my mom again. And I knew that she needed to talk to me if she was calling twice in a row. So I answered the phone. And when I answered the phone, I just heard inaudible screaming on the other end of the line. And my first thought was something happened to my daughter. And I remember in that moment, I yelled back, what happened? What happened? And it was just screaming. And I said, did you call an ambulance? And the voice on the other end of the line said yes. And then the phone went dead. I had my business partner, because I couldn't drive because I was terrified that the worst had happened to my daughter. I got in her car and we drove less than a mile back to my parents' house. And when I pulled into the she pulled into the driveway and I got out, my dad was standing there in the driveway with another one of his friends who was a Marine that he served with. And it confused me, but I wasn't putting all the pieces together. And I looked at my dad and I said, where's the ambulance? And he looked at me and just said, Travis has been killed. And it was this moment where I had to shift from thinking that something terrible had happened to my daughter to now realizing that my best friend and brother had been killed. And I talk about it a lot. You know, my brother was on his second deployment to Iraq. And a lot of people ask me, well, didn't you always have it in the back of your mind that something could happen to him? And very honestly, I didn't. And I think looking back on it, it was probably a coping mechanism that I used to some degree, because I always envisioned this idea of needle in the haystack. There were thousands and thousands of men and women that were serving in Iraq and Afghanistan. And the fraction of them that were losing their lives was small in comparison to how many were over there. So I pretended to myself that there's no way that anything's going to happen to my brother. So to hear the news that he had been killed was the worst thing that could ever happen to my family and I. And I collapsed right there on the driveway. And it took me a few minutes to pick myself up and to get back up. And I remember a very pivotal moment. And it was the moment I walked through my parents' front door. My parents' neighbor kind of helped me to my feet and walked me down the driveway. And I remember walking through that front door. And as I took a step inside my parents' house, I remember thinking, nothing will ever be the same again. And that was a scary thought and a scary realization. And so my family and I committed. It was actually the day of Travis's funeral. My dad pulled my mom, my husband, and myself into their bedroom. And my dad turned to us and he said, you know, I don't know what happens from this moment forward, but I know that we have an obligation to continue Travis's legacy of service and to make him proud and to live lives worthy of his sacrifice. We had no idea at the time what that meant, but we all committed that we were going to follow forth with that path. A few weeks after Travis's death, my parents' friends had set up, right when he was killed, in lieu of flowers, donate to the First Lieutenant Travis Manion Memorial Fund. And so a few weeks later, as we were sitting down and trying to start digging through the process of how we were going to move on, we realized that we had several $100,000 in a bank account, but didn't know what we were going to do with it. And it was my mom who said that she wanted to make sure that we set something up to make sure that we were providing the same type of support to other families that were receiving that knock on the door. So within a year, the Travis Manion Foundation was born, was a registered 501c3 charity, and was starting to do some really incredible work. I was not part of the foundation at first. I realized very quickly that being a small business owner and owning clothing boutiques, while at one point in my life brought me so much purpose and passion, I no longer felt the same purpose or passion for it anymore. So within the year, I closed both of my stores. And in my mind, I wanted to give back. I wanted to do something. I wanted to feel like I was serving too. I felt like I was too old and I was already a mother. I wasn't going to join the military, but I decided to take a job with the government. I thought, well, I'll work for the government. That'll be my way of serving my country. I realized very quickly that that was not something that made me feel like I was serving. And as I was sitting in a government desk job, my mom decided, as the foundation was growing, that she was going to hire an executive director for the Travis Manion Foundation. At this point, there were about 3 employees working underneath her. And I'll never forget the day I put my resume together and I submitted it to careers@travismanion.org. And I like to say that there was no nepotism involved, but I did get the job to serve as the executive director of the Travis Manion Foundation. But I laugh about it because while I was the executive director, I really was Janet Manion's assistant. And I was okay with that. I was her apprentice. I was following everything that she had set forward, and she had big ideas. My mom was someone who had very grand ideas, almost to the point where you would say, all right, you have to throttle back a little. But I realized that the vision she set forward at the Travis Manion Foundation are the reason that we are where we are today. I worked with my mom for about 9 months. We worked side by side, and it was the first time since Travis's loss that I really felt a passion for what I was doing again, and felt like I was continuing his legacy and again, living a life worthy of his sacrifice. One of the hardest days while working alongside my mom at the Travis Manion Foundation was the day that she received a call from my brother's best friend and roommate at the Naval Academy's mom to tell my mother that she had too just received the same knock at the door almost 3 years after Travis's death, and that Travis's best friend, Brendan Looney, had been killed in Afghanistan. And that was a devastating blow. And I remember when Travis was killed, my first words out of my mouth were, "It's not fair." But when Brendan was killed, not only did I say that again, but I really felt it. And all I could think was, how could both of these individuals with so much left to give be gone? Brendan's widow, Amy, shortly joined the foundation right after she lost her husband, recognizing that her job as a pharmaceutical sales rep was just not going to cut it anymore. And so she joined us and worked alongside. And for a very brief moment, my mom, Amy Looney, Brendan's widow, and myself were really doing some big things together at TMF. Unfortunately, my mom was diagnosed with cancer very unexpectedly. And she was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer and given 8 months to live. And 8 months, almost 8 months to the day, and just 3 days before Travis's 5th anniversary of his death, my mom lost her battle with cancer. And for me, traveling along those 5 years, the loss of Travis, the loss of Brendan 3 years later, and the loss of my mom 2 years after that, that was kind of where I hit my breaking point, I would say, and where I started to say, okay, I'm going to have to process all of these things that's happened to me in the last 5 years. Because for a lot of that time, I had bottled everything inside. And really, the way that I moved forward was just by keeping busy. And it was, okay, what can I do now that I can focus on so I can move on to the next thing? And I didn't really process my grief and what I was going through. And frankly, the knock at the door that started on April 29th, 2007. And it was at that time that Amy and I decided, along with another woman, Heather Kelly, who works for us as well. And Heather's husband was killed just a couple weeks after Brendan. He was a Marine also. His father was General John Kelly, who served as President Trump's chief of staff for a short while. At the time, he was a 4-star general when his son was killed. So it was a very big news story. And there was a lot of light put on Rob's story when he was killed. And that was very hard for Heather, as an introverted person who very much liked to keep private. It was very hard for her to deal with that loss. The three of us started talking one day. And again, we all worked together at the Travis Manion Foundation at this point. And we started to talk about our collective losses and the things that we had learned as we had moved forward and navigated the years that followed. And one of the things that we came to the conclusion about is that we, all three of us, received literal knocks at the door. People that came to our door, put their fist up to the door and knocked on it. And as soon as that door was open, our lives were changed forever. But we felt that there was something very interesting about the fact that while we received these literal knock at the doors, each and every one of us is going to receive knocks at the door throughout our lives. And they can come in many different forms. But what we wanted to do in sharing this book was share how we navigated our knocks and things we did to help us, and also things that we think we should have thought about leading up to those knocks at the door. I don't want to say that I'm the expert in grief and resilience. I don't want to say that I'm prepared for the next knock at the door that may come for me. But I think what we need to know is that while we're all going to receive knocks at the door, they will define us, but they don't have the power to completely change us. And only we can write our stories, and only we can be the ones that are in control of how we respond to these knocks. So the book was written as part memoir to share our stories and for a deeper understanding about the military world and what these men and women experience and what their families experience, but also for each of us to understand how we can move forward with a resilient light and how we can use that idea of resilience to propel us when we receive knocks at the door. I think, for me, one of the things I talk about a lot in the book is setting small goals. And they can be, again, in pre or post April 29th, I used them as a way to push out. Processing my grief. I now use them as a way to propel me to move forward in a positive way while making sure that I'm understanding everything else that is going on around me. Another one of the things that I talk about in the book, and I hope we dive, because I think it's very important given our specific situation now with COVID-19 and the isolation, is I dealt with some mental health challenges. Not so much after the loss of Travis, but more so after the loss of my mom. And again, I think it was this culmination of me not processing my feelings and what I was going through. And I used coping mechanisms and tactics that I thought would be easy. I always look back and, when I was young, if I was feeling some sort of way, whether I was sad or lonely or whatever emotion it may be, and I expressed that to my dad, my Marine Corps father would say, we'll go for a run. And my dad thought that all ailments of the mind could be healed by a good jog outside. And I used that very much. I mean, in fact, one of the first things I did after Travis was killed, I ran a marathon because I was like, well, I got to get out there and run. And I am a huge proponent of the idea of physical fitness to help with some of the things we're dealing with mentally. But I also found that for me, after my mom was killed, that just wasn't working anymore as the only component. So it took staying active and living an active lifestyle along with a combination of therapy and talking through my emotions to get to where I am today. But I think it's something that, you know, is very stigmatized. And I think we're doing a better job as a society to pull that out. But, you know, it's still, I mean, it's hard for me to say, listen, I'm a 40-year-old woman who 5 years ago was diagnosed with PTSD. And when I was diagnosed with PTSD, I didn't go back to my therapist for 6 months because I was so upset, ashamed, embarrassed, every emotion you can think of. And I couldn't believe, but I picked up the phone and I called Amy Looney, my co-author, and I said, you're never going to believe this. She was one of the only people who knew that I was in therapy. And I said, you're never going to believe this. My therapist diagnosed me with PTSD. She doesn't know what she's talking about. I'll never go back. And she said, Ryan, I was diagnosed with PTSD like 3 years ago, you know, get current, get with it. And so just her making light of it and showing me that it was okay, those were the beginning steps for me to work through some of the things that I was dealing with. So with that in mind, I thank you very much. I hope that you'll all take the time to read the book. I think that at the end of the day, like I said, for those that have a connection to the military, you'll find this book enlightening and be able to feel a sense of that military community. For those that aren't connected to the military, I think it's important for you to understand the sacrifices that families deal with when they have loved ones serving. And for those of you that are working your way through different challenges as over the course of your lives, this is a book that you know, can give you, we always say we're not self-help experts, but we're experts just by sheer amount of experience. So I hope that you'll all read the book. And I thank you so much. I'm looking forward to answering some questions. And I thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you so much, Ryan. My name is Kate Shields. I am a chamber member and I'm the CEO of Vault Communications, a full service marketing communications firm in Plymouth Meeting, Pennsylvania. And it's my honor to be the host of the Fireside Chat with Ryan today. So the first thing I'll say is if you have any questions for Ryan, I've prepared some already and I have some that are coming off the top of my head as Ryan spoke, but if you have them, please put them in the chat and I'll be sure to look and moderate those questions. Before I dive in and thank Ryan for being here today and also reflect on some of the things that she brought to light through her book, I just wanted to give a quick recognition since this is the Women in Leadership series to the Museum of the American Revolution. If you don't know, the museum has an amazing exhibit called When Women Lost the Right to Vote. I'm sure you're listening to that and wondering, what do you mean when they lost the right to vote? Because this is the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment being ratified that gave many women the right to vote in this country, not all, but many women the right to vote. The museum has uncovered this fascinating amount of research out of the state of New Jersey, actually not too far across the river, that the women in our country and free people of color actually did have the right to vote for a period of time in New Jersey from 1776 to, I believe it's 1807. And that exhibit opened in October, right around the time that the museum was able to open again to the public. So you can actually go to the museum now, mask on, of course, to check out the exhibit live. And there's also going to be a virtual component in November. Personally speaking, I was involved in the committee to bring this exhibit to life. And I'm really, really proud to say that because I'm the mom of 3 girls. And I think what the museum has is very unique. There are many museums around the country celebrating 100 years of the 19th Amendment, but this is a very unique exhibit. You can actually go to the museum and you can see the actual voter rolls from 1776 in New Jersey and see the names of the very first women to vote in this country. It's a story that a lot of people do not know. And every single person I've shared it with in my network is like, who knew? Who knew that women had the right to vote and that it was stripped away? So I encourage you to go see it. The other thing that's there is the famous letter from Abigail Adams to her husband, John, reminding him to remember the ladies. It's on loan, and it's the first time I believe it's been on loan. So please, if you have a chance to go down and see it, I encourage you to do so. It's an incredible exhibit, and the Museum of the American Revolution has been an active and very engaged member of our chamber. So it would also be lovely to support them in that regard. So with that being said, I just wanted to say to Ryan, the first thing I would say about you is that you're so authentic. And I want to thank you for that authenticity and brave. And it runs in the family. I want to thank you for your brother's sacrifice. I want to thank you for your father's as well as a member of our military, and your entire family's sacrifice, because truly that is the case. Your family has made the ultimate sacrifice along with your brother. So I want to thank you for that. I also want to thank you for the candor in the book. The authenticity that you see today is certainly reflected in the book. I did buy a copy, and I encourage you all to do that. It is wonderful, not only if you have a military connection in your family, but as Ryan referenced, it's wonderful for those knock at the doors that we all do receive in our life. And I think that's the biggest thing that strikes me about you, Ryan, is how much you have endured in such a short period of time. You're very young at 40, and you have your whole life ahead of you, but yet you have experienced some of the biggest blows that life can give. And you have experienced that in pretty rapid succession. And I think when you are someone that goes through that, yes, you're resilient, but it's also, you have perspective. So I want to ask you one question is, you go through losing your brother, you go through losing your mom. What are some of the challenges you face? And what do you consider a challenge now that you've kind of gone through that? What are the current challenges you're facing in running the foundation? Or maybe you can even speak to what we're all going through with the pandemic and how that lens, because you are truly battle tested. How has that kind of reframed your reference on what a challenge is?
Sure. Well, thank you so much, Kate. I think the first thing that I would say, and I know this can sound a little contrite, but I recognize that life is fragile. I recognize that tomorrow is not promised. I think it's very easy to say that. It's very easy to, but it's harder to live that each and every day. And I don't honestly know if you can fully appreciate that until you have been dealt with certain things. And so before the loss of my brother and my mom, I could say like, oh, I appreciate every day. I don't know if I really did, And so for me, it's about really after my mom was killed, one of the things I didn't talk about is that at this point, when my mom passed away, after my mom passed away, at this point, this was in 2012, and our organization was bringing in several $1 million a year.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, I was Janet Manion's assistant. So 3 weeks after she passed away, the board of directors said, Ryan, you are now the president of the Travis Manion Foundation. And there had never been a scarier time in my life because I felt like I had such tremendous shoes to fill, not only to carry forth an organization in my brother's name, but also an organization that was born out of a mother's love. And for me, I was terrified. And so I did some things to set myself up for success. And one of the first things I did was I went and hired really smart people to serve on my leadership team. But I look at, this whole exercise in COVID, it was a big wake-up call for our organization, 60 individuals that work for us across the country, that the genesis of what we do with the organization is very much based around face-to-face interactions. We hold several large-scale events, and that is our bread and butter both financially, but also it's the beauty of our organization. We consider ourselves this really united community of individuals across the country that go out and give back to others. And all of a sudden that was just taken away from us. Yeah. And we had to, on the fly, figure out how we were going to move forward. And in the beginning, you know, I'll tell you, in the beginning, I was scared out of my mind. I was putting together doomsday plans for the Travis Manion Foundation when we didn't know anything that was going on. But all I knew is that our programs were not going to not be able to run anymore. Because I made the investment back in 2012 in building a really strong team, we were able to innovate. And I'll tell you, some of the things we did are going to be practices that we will use going forward, regardless of if we're in a global pandemic or not. So I actually look at this time as a time for us to be able to reflect, and, you know, all the things that we said we were going to talk about and do. And as an organization, it was always, we never had the time. So for me personally, I went from an individual who was traveling 60% of the time to someone that didn't get on a plane from March until September. That was huge. Mm-hmm. To be able to kind of reinvest in my children and really take a hard look on my children's needs and just in my life in general, you know, from my business to my family. I'm trying to look at the silver lining. And again, I think we all have the power to have that sort of mindset, but I think it came easier to me knowing that, again, we do really never know what tomorrow is going to have in store for us.
Absolutely. The next question is one that I had, and I just saw Eileen McDonald also made a comment about it. So I want to address it because I think it's really important. You know, what really has struck me in the book and struck me in your talk today, and clearly struck Eileen as well, is how authentic you are too about mental health and how critical that is. And I think if there is a silver lining to the pandemic, I feel as though there has been some normalization of talking about mental health, specifically in the workplace. Mm-hmm. I can tell you, I don't have as many team members as you. I have 47 people, but mental health and the mental health of my employees has been my primary concern since March. And it continues to be my primary concern, especially as we face the winter doldrums that are already an issue for a lot of people absent a pandemic, let alone for many of us who are going to still be remote in the home, unable to get that outside physical activity that you referred to. So having 60 people, I wanted to ask you a little bit about how did the lessons you learned in your own personal life as it regards to your mental health, how are you bearing that out in your organization? What are some of the ways you're checking in on your people, making sure their mental health is okay? And what are some of the tactics you're deploying in your organization to ensure that people are minding their mind?
Well, I will tell you that they're very simple tactics, but they're very effective. The mm-hmm. first thing that we set out to do with the organization was we always look at it in a two-part steps. The first is we need to take care of ourselves before we can go out and take care of others. And so we had this big plan that we were going to start buddy checks with all of the veterans that we serve, thousands and thousands of veterans across the country. And we were going to employ not only our staff, but some of our key volunteers. Before we did that, I said, before we go out and do buddy checks with others, we're going to do buddy checks with each other. So we started there just by simply checking in. I started doing things little things. I started texting all of my employees that live in Seattle that honestly, I've never even met in person because they were hired a year ago. And then, you know, when we were supposed to meet at a summit in April, that didn't happen. But I started texting my employees. We did webinars on mental health. We brought in a third-party expert on mental health and made sure that each and every one of our staff knew where to get the resources if they so needed them. But I'll tell you, one of the most effective things that we did is we made a very conscious effort to be social with each other. And that's very hard in a virtual world, but I'm blown away by my team and all the innovative things that we've done. I mean, just last week I joined them, and I'm not able to join them all, but I love that we have these opportunities. Each week they're doing something different. And last week it was a virtual scavenger hunt. And we sat down and it was 4:00 and we said, Thursday ends at 4:00, join the virtual scavenger hunt, and the whole staff joined. And we had moderators that said, okay, go find a toothbrush. And the first person that came back with a toothbrush, but it was just this idea that we were there, we were feeling like we were part of this collective team. And so it's really little things like that. Number one, making sure you're pulling the team together. And number two, making sure that they understand the resources are out there. And most importantly, and you touch on it, make sure they know that it's okay. I mean, I think for me, making sure that my staff knew that, like, listen, I've dealt with mental health challenges. I still deal with anxiety and I have days where I'm not feeling myself, and that's okay. And that's not going to prevent you from moving up within this company or moving up wherever you go professionally. And so again, just kind of taking the stigma out of that conversation.
And I think that that's actually an illustration of your principle in your book about the chisel versus the jackhammer when you're facing a problem. I think for leaders, we tend to want to jackhammer everything. And when our people aren't feeling good, we want to solve that as soon as possible. But I think things like texting, things like smaller programming, that is truly chiseling away at the problem. So that's really a great illustration of that principle in your book. I have a question from the chat. What is something that you would say to a young woman just starting her career, or maybe Ryan at age 22?
Oh my, I would say so many things to Ryan at age 22. Oh my goodness. I have the awesome opportunity to speak to a lot of young kids through we have a character development program at our organization. So I speak at a lot of high schools, I speak at a lot of colleges, and I think one of the things that I would say, and I do say to young people, is for me, and I touched on it briefly, I wasn't very concerned with where I was going to be later in life. It was not something, I decided on my major when I got to college. It was always like, well, I'll figure it out. I'll figure it out. I'll figure it out. And I wish that I would have been more thoughtful about what I wanted to do. And listen, you're not expecting every kid at 22 or at any age to have it all figured out. But I think taking the time to be thoughtful and have thoughtful conversations with those that you trust about things you're interested in. And again, setting goals. It's something that I think is so important. It's something that I do today. And when I talk about setting goals, and I always talk to kids about this, it's not about being big in the big things, right? So it's about being big in the little things. And being big in the little things is going to prepare you to be big in those big moments. So finding that right balance of being a kid, but also knowing, and I always talk to my daughter about this, like, always know where you want your trajectory to go. And if you want your trajectory to go in a certain place, there's things you have to do every single day to set yourself up for that. Doesn't mean you can't have fun. It doesn't mean you can't be a teenager, but you have to have those little moments every day where you're setting yourself up for success.
It's a good segue to another question that's been posed. So here's the chat. I'm interested to hear more about finding your way in a new reality. When you decided to change your focus and look toward working at the Travis Manion Foundation, what notions of where you should be at that stage in your life did you have to put to rest? So that is a question about trajectory and thinking about where you might think you would be at a certain point.
Sure. Yeah. So, again, when I graduated college, I had this grand idea. This is what I'm going to do. And again, I was doing good. I was successful at it. And I never thought for 1 second that I was going to be doing anything other than that. I thought, I've got this clothing business. I'm going to, maybe I'll franchise it, but I'm going to have locations all over. And that was the trajectory for me. After Travis was death, I had to kind of reevaluate. And I think all of us, when you look at yourself, I think all of us have to look at, I really started to pay a lot of attention to not just what do you want to do and how are you going to find success, but how are you going to thrive as an individual? And thriving as an individual takes into effect not just what's going to pay the bills, but what's going to bring you purpose to your life. And I had a very pivotal moment with my clothing business. It wasn't Travis died, I closed the doors. I went back, I signed the lease on that second store. I opened that store in Doylestown. And it was about 6 months later, I was opening a box of designer jeans, and it was a big contract that I had gotten. The fact that I was able to sell these designer jeans and no one else in 20-mile radius could sell them because I had the exclusivity on them. A year prior, it would have been like big news, and it would have been the mecca for me. And I opened that box of jeans and I was folding them, and I just thought, this brings me nothing. I feel nothing. And I knew at that moment that I had to do something else. And it, it took some learning curves. I worked for the government, and then it was finding that opportunity within the Travis Manion Foundation. And I always say this, and I think it's important. Not all of us are going to be able to work a day job that is going to bring them the type of passion that I feel working at an organization in my brother's name. I understand how blessed I am to wake up every day and be able to live my purpose through my day job. But each and every one of us can find opportunities to thrive as individuals and to find that purpose. Maybe it's not in your 9-to-5 job, but we have to search for those opportunities outside of that. And they exist. And a lot of that is what we say we offer as the Travis Manion Foundation. We offer this opportunity for you to be a part of something bigger than yourself and to give back. And so I think when you look at this idea of trajectory, you have to look at things that are going to help you thrive as an individual and to bring you that purpose and passion every single day.
Another really good question, and it has to do with the clothing business as well. You seem to be somebody who's open to risk and kind of new opportunities. So you started your clothing store, you sold it, or not sold it, you closed it. How did you develop that skill? Because to embrace risk is truly a skill, and to be fearless in the face of risk is a skill. And so how did you develop that skill, and how has it served you over the years, even in your work with the foundation?
Sure. I mean, this was something that, looking back, I think I learned it and I developed it from my upbringing. I would say my dad tends to be more risk adverse. It's probably, instilled in him a little bit as a Marine. But my mom was not risk adverse, and my mom was always willing to try something new. And I think I kind of developed that from her. She was more bold than even I was. But I look at this woman that, prior to the Travis Manion Foundation, at 50 years old, she was 50 years old when my brother was killed. Leading up to that, she was a military spouse for 20 something years. A military spouse who followed my dad around and supported our family and took odd jobs as teacher's aides or a secretary at a dental office. I mean, that's what she did. And then all of a sudden at 50 years old, her life has changed, and she looked for, she very well. And when we look at the Travis Manion Foundation, and originally my dad and I looked at it as a way for a grieving mother to channel her grief through a small little memorial fund. We thought it would stay very close to the Philadelphia area. It started by giving scholarships at LaSalle College High School, where Travis went to high school. We did some stuff at the Naval Academy, but she was the one who was taking those big risks. And I think watching her, and watching how she did that with just, and again, I think a lot of the reason she did that is because what did she have to lose at this point? She was going to take those big risks. You know, my brother had just been killed. She was going to do something bold. And I look at it that way too. I always think that, you know, it's not going to happen if we don't try. And I've had plenty of failures in my life. And I think if we don't let our failures define us, we can use them as stepping stones to help us grow. And I've always very much viewed my life in that way. And I think my parents have taught me that. And so I'm always ready and willing to try something new.
And it's also another good concept from your book for those who haven't read it yet, that failure is not a tattoo. Failure is a bruise, which I thought was really, really poignant. So again,
my favorite saying.
Another good illustration from the book. Two more quick questions. One's logistical, but it does segue into something I wanted to ask, because I think a lot of people on this call probably would love to know how they can help and how they can be action oriented. So in a logistical question from Tom Humphrey is whether or not you're moving forward with the 9/11 Heroes Run this year. And then my follow-up question to that is, how do we chisel away at the problems facing our vets right now? What are some of the ways, especially in these times, that we can be helpful to the foundation and the problems facing veterans, and how has the pandemic affected our veterans?
Sure. So first question, the 9/11 Heroes Run took place and is still taking place in a virtual capacity. We've had close to 20,000 people that have signed up to virtually run the Heroes Run. You can go online to travismanion.org, sign up for the Heroes Run. You will get the same packet if you've participated in any of our races. You'll get the t-shirt, which is a great t-shirt this year. And then you go out and you run that 5K. Take a picture, post it to social media. But we were thrilled that we had, again, so many thousands of people across the country that came out and did this virtually for us. And I think, you know, again, for us, I talked about, we are very much a community at the Travis Manion Foundation. And it was about making sure, and a lot of our veterans are very active in the way that they find healing is through serving others. And we want to give them that opportunity, and we want to continue to give them that opportunity. So as I said, when we talked about mental health and the staff, we did the buddy checks with the staff. Then we went out and placed calls to thousands of veterans and did buddy checks to all of our veteran volunteers to say, where are you? And we actually did a whole survey on that. We measured our outcomes, and we realized that not all of our veterans were okay. When we were saying, we started out by saying, hey, we need volunteers at the food drive here. We need this there. And so we had veterans that were out all over doing stuff. And then we had veterans that said, well, wait a minute. What about us? Like, we need help too. I can't go out and help at the food bank because I'm a single father that has 2 kids that are learning virtually from home, and I'm an essential worker. And that's when we did the pump the brakes. We needed to make sure that our members were supported before they, again, our employees need to be supported before they could support our members. Our members need to be supported before they could go out and serve the communities. And so we focused on that. I think that we're in a place now where, again, we run studies each year for the past 2 years on our veteran population, and the activities they do with the Travis Manion Foundation, the outcomes we're having. And, you know, I don't want to pat ourselves on the back too much, but I will. Veterans that participate in our programs have much higher levels of mental health and well-being than those that don't. And it is because we have created a community they feel a part of, a community they feel camaraderie with. And not only that, we are giving them the opportunity for multiple engagements to go out and feel that same sense of a feeling that they felt while they served in the military, feel that sense of being a part of something bigger than themselves, giving them that sense of purpose again, where they can thrive as individuals. And it's a simple recipe, but it's very effective. And I think, you know, the best way the civilian population can support our veterans is, number one, making sure that we understand that they are civic assets. If you have veterans within your community, within your workforce, it's important to understand the value that they can bring. And number two, I will say, within the Travis Manion Foundation, the beauty of our organization is that we are not just limited to veterans and families of the fallen. We have opportunities for each and every one of us to serve and to get involved in a myriad of different ways. So if you're not familiar with the Travis Manion Foundation, I encourage you all to log on to our website to join the mission and to find out more, because I think, again, you will all find a way that you can get involved, whether that is from donating or just by serving.
Okay. I want to thank you again for all of your insights. You're just awesome. I don't know how else to put it. You're absolutely awesome.
Oh,
and
thank you.
so just again, so authentic. And thank you so much for just letting us into what I know is a very difficult, intimate lens, right? Grief is a beast, and you talk a lot about it. And I'm sure many of us on the call have experienced, but definitely not at the level to maybe what you have in your short amount of time on this planet. And I encourage you to continue to just forge ahead, because what you're doing is so, so important. And I really appreciate you giving us some ideas on how we can help. I am going to turn it over to Caroline, who is going to wrap up our program for the day.
Thank you. Thanks again, Ryan, for sharing your story. It was a wonderful, wonderful presentation, and some great points, areas that are so important in resilience, mental health awareness, and that impact us all, especially through these times. And I want to thank also Kate for guiding the conversation. And I think Alana now is going to announce the winners of the raffle.
Yep. So I'm just about to actually post it in our chat. We're raffling 5 of Ryan's books, and I'm just posting the winners here. Rebecca Noonan, Jim Burns, Sheila McGreal, Kathy Belwar, and Allison O'Malley. So we'll be sending those out to you over the next, they should arrive within the next couple weeks. So hopefully you'll enjoy the read. Sounds amazing. Can't wait to read it myself, Ryan.
Thanks, Alana. So thanks again, Ryan and Kate, and also our sponsor, Daily LLP. We will have a recording of today's program available on the Irish Chamber's website as soon as possible. And we hope to see you on our next virtual program, Ireland, Your Business Gateway to Europe. And it's on Wednesday, November 4th at 11 a.m. And all the details will be available on the website, iabcn.org. So thank you everyone for joining today, and have a wonderful week. And we look forward to seeing you again soon. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Take care. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye. Bye.